Our next panelist, who will further expand on the topic of growing geopolitical dangers and emerging risks, is Michael Klare. Michael Klare is the Professor Emeritus of Peace and World Security Studies at Hampshire College. He now serves as a Senior Visiting Fellow at the Arms Control Association in Washington, D.C. From 1985 to 2018, he was the Five College Professor of Peace and World Security Studies, a joint appointment at Amherst, Hampshire, Mount Holyoke, and Smith Colleges, and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He has written widely on international peace and security, arms control and disarmament, and global resource politics. He's the author of 15 books, including most recently Resource Wars 2001, Blood and Oil 2005, The Race for What's Left 2012, and All Hell Breaking Loose, Climate Change, Global Chaos, and American National Security 2019. He's also the defense correspondent of The Nation and has written for many other journals, including Arms Control Today, Current History, Foreign Affairs, Harper's, Le Monde Diplomatique, Newsweek, Scientific American, and Technology Review. Michael, welcome to the panel.
Hello, everyone. And I'm so honored to be participating in this amazing event. And I want to congratulate the sponsors for putting this together. I'm going to continue where Zia left off, emphasizing the geopolitical factors that lead to nuclear war. And I'm going to be showing some slides, so I will be now sharing my screen. And I want to make the key point that we have to think about not just nuclear weapons, the weapons themselves, but also the geopolitical environment in which a decision to employ nuclear weapons might be made, which is exactly what Zia was talking about. At this moment, I think it's highly unlikely that any of the nuclear armed states will employ nuclear weapons in a deliberate fashion, what people call a bolt out of the blue. But in the current geopolitical environment, all of the nuclear armed powers are prepared to use nuclear weapons if a conflict has begun and their non-nuclear conventional forces are deemed to be at risk. Looking back, we have to remember that the geopolitical factor was present at the very dawn of the nuclear age. The first and only use of nuclear weapons occurred at the end of an epical struggle between the major powers of the time for control of the European heartlands, Europe and Asia. And in that epical struggle, it was believed that the way to break the will of the enemy power was to destroy their cities and their industrial heartlands by using massive bombing and firebombing, as in Tokyo, and the destruction of Dresden. And this was considered legitimate. And Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a natural consequence of that mode of thinking. During the Cold War, the major powers of the time, the US and the USSR, again engaged in an unremitting struggle for control of the Eurasian heartland. And as during World War II, both sides assumed that any war between them would eventually involve strikes on the homeland of the other side, and including attacks on their major cities and industrial centers. Of course, this time fought entirely with nuclear weapons, leading to massive destruction, as Zia Mian told us. And to ensure that if either side sought to achieve victory with the use of conventional weapons, conventional forces through a massive attack, like a massive tank attack, both sides deployed what they call tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons in Europe, so that at the beginning of any conflict, it would immediately escalate to the nuclear level, such as you see, the Pershing II and the Soviet SS-20 battlefield nuclear weapons. But the deployment of those battlefield nuclear weapons precipitated a massive anti-nuclear movement around the world. Millions of people demonstrated. And I highlight that today because we have to remember that throughout the past 50 years, peace movements have had a dramatic impact. And we have to remember we can do that again, because the massive protests of the 1980s led to the signing of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty of 1987, which banned those kind of battlefield nuclear weapons. And from that point on, there was a severing of the links between conventional and nuclear weapons. And when the Cold War ended, this kind of geopolitical contestation largely subsided. And so the use of nuclear weapons became far less conceivable. And President Obama, in this environment, sought to reduce reliance on nuclear weapons. And I have a quote here from his famous speech in April 2009 in Prague, when he said, to put an end to Cold War thinking, we will reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy and urge others to do the same. But today, after a hiatus of nearly 30 years, the major world powers are again contending for geopolitical advantage on both sides of the Eurasian heartland, as Zia laid out very clearly. And all three are preparing for major conventional engagements that could easily escalate to the nuclear level. This new strategic environment, called great power competition in the US military literature, was first described by Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis in 2018, in which he said it's no longer terrorism that will define our military policy, but the primary focus is now on long-term strategic competition among the great powers. And this led to the two documents which continue to govern US military policy today: the National Defense Strategy of 2018 and the Nuclear Posture Review, also of 2018. The NDS identifies China and Russia as America's principal adversaries and says the US military must be prepared for full-scale, high-intensity combat with those countries, and it's expected that such combat will entail the use of the most advanced conventional weapons available, and it might entail significant risk of nuclear escalation. And the Nuclear Posture Review calls for the complete replacement of all nuclear weapons in the US arsenal with more modern and capable replacements, and the acquisition of low-yield nuclear munitions to allow the president the option of a tailored or flexible nuclear response. So we're going back to where we were during the Cold War. In accordance with the NDS, the US military is now preparing to fight and defeat Russian and Chinese forces on or near their own territory. And I emphasize this because of the extreme danger. And we don't have time for me to really explain this chart. This is a US Army chart explaining how the Army will fight and defeat Russia in a future war in Europe. But the essence is that US forces on outside, it says US forces outside, there will be a convergence of all kinds of modern weaponry on Russian heartland, their main military assets, their air defenses, their radars, their command and control. Once those are destroyed, US forces will move inside and destroy what's left of the Russian military. And to enhance this ability of the US to fight inside Russian and Chinese territory, the US has withdrawn from the INF Treaty, allowing for the deployment of missiles with ranges banned by that treaty, and accelerated the development of hypersonic missiles that go more than 5 times the speed of sound and are in INF prohibited ranges. Also, in accordance with the Nuclear Posture Review, the US has commenced the installation of a low-yield nuclear warhead. Low-yield means it's not quite as big as Hiroshima, but approaching that size, on submarines, and is planning a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile. All of this is contributing to a significantly enhanced risk of a nuclear event. The combination of a geopolitical stance emphasizing intense competition with Russia and China, and a military doctrine favoring attacks with advanced conventional weapons on Russian and Chinese territory increases the risk of nuclear war in two ways. First, by multiplying the risks of military clashes near Russia or Chinese territory with escalatory consequences. And I want to tell you, every day, US bombers and warships are probing close up to Russian and Chinese territory. This is the USS Nimitz, which was close up to Chinese territory under Biden just a month ago. Secondly, the risk is increasing by eroding the distinction between conventional and nuclear attacks, by deploying these INF prohibited hypersonic weapons and other advanced conventional weapons that close the fire break between nuclear and conventional weapons and threaten the key assets of Russia and China, making it more likely that they might use nuclear weapons in a clash. And I have a quote here from Vladimir Putin saying that in the event of aggression with conventional weapons that threatens the existence of the state, we're prepared to use nuclear weapons. And I'm sure China has a similar policy. And under those circumstances, the US could use nuclear weapons first. So to conclude, it seems to me that we have some important actions and policies that we have to take. In addition to opposing the weapons themselves, we have to oppose the geopolitical policies and military doctrines that make nuclear weapons use more likely, and specifically to repudiate the great power competition strategy embedded in the National Defense Strategy, to repudiate the Nuclear Posture Review with its call for low-yield nuclear weapons, to repudiate military strategies that call for conventional attacks on Russian and Chinese territory and cease provocative air and naval maneuvers on Russia and China's borders, and to initiate high-level talks with Russia and China to minimize threats from hypersonic weapons and other emerging technologies, and hopefully to negotiate a new tripartite INF treaty. Thank you very much.